please stop. I need to check your identity. Why are you walking alone on the road? I am going to home after my work. Sir, I stopped you to check if you're a criminal or if you're wandering alone under the influence. No, officer, I was just walking alone, not under influence.
At 5 a.m., a police officer spotted a man limping down a dark highway. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't running from the law. He was a mechanic, walking 15 kilometers back from a garage. Because missing his first day at work wasn't an option. What happened next silenced the officer and changed this man's life forever. Backhand Index Pointing writes, subscribe now for real stories that prove determination still exists. Just weeks after turning 22, the young mechanic learned how fast life could strip everything away. The storm didn't knock politely. It tore through his neighborhood like it had a grudge, ripping roofs apart, flooding rooms, crushing what little security his family had built over years. By morning, their home was barely standing. By nightfall, the savings were gone. Every dollar he'd ever set aside vanished into repairs, food, and survival. Bills didn't care about age. They stacked up anyway. For weeks, he lived on hope and instant noodles, until finally, something went right. A full-time job at a logistics company. It wasn't glamorous. Long shifts, heavy work. But to him, it felt like oxygen. A steady paycheck, a way out, a chance to help his family breathe again. That morning, he hugged his mother tighter than usual and promised, asterisk, things will be okay now. Asterisk, he meant it. Then came the night. After his first long shift, exhausted but proud, he turned the key in his old car. The same car he'd repaired countless times for others, but never had money to fix properly himself. Nothing. No ignition. No engine sound. Just silence and the ticking of the cooling metal. He popped the hood under a flickering streetlight, hands moving on instinct. One look told him the truth. This wasn't a small fix. The car was done. Completely. Permanently. His phone showed $17 in his account. Too little for a tow. Too little for repairs. Too little for a ride. He called everyone he knew. No answers. No rides. No miracles. In his new job, clear rules. Asterisk, no excuses. No late arrivals. Asterisk. So he made a decision no one should have to make on their first day of hope. He locked the dead car, shouldered his warm backpack, and started walking 15 miles. Through the dark, through the cold, not knowing that before the night was over, a single police siren would change everything. The garage door creaked as he pushed it open, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the empty street. Inside, the place smelled like oil, rust, and old memories. Flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting tired shadows across toolboxes and half-dismantled engines. This was familiar ground. Comforting even. He'd spent years fixing other people's problems in places just like this. Tonight, he prayed this place could fix his. The mechanic on duty looked up from a workbench, wiping grease from his hands. He listened quietly as the young man explained. The storm, the new job, the dead car, the empty bank account. No exaggeration. No drama. Just truth. The older man sighed and stepped outside with him. He checked the engine once. Then again, then shook his head. Transmission's gone, he said softly. Even if I wanted to help, I can't do this for free. The words weren't cruel. They were honest. The young mechanic nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He already knew the answer before he asked. He thanked the man, zipped up his jacket, and stepped back into the night. The garage door closed behind him with a final clang. That was the sound of the last door shutting. He leaned against the cold brick wall and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up his tired face as he opened the map app. He typed in the address of the logistics company, the place that held his future. The blue line appeared. 15 kilometers. Below it, smaller text delivered the final blow. Walking time, 5 hours, 12 minutes. He swallowed. It was already past midnight. If he wanted even a chance of being on time, he had to leave now. No rest. No detours. No mistakes. His legs ached just thinking about it. He'd already worked a full shift. His boots were worn. His jacket was thin. And the streets between here and there weren't kind at night. He looked around, half expecting the universe to intervene. A passing car. A miracle ride. Anything. Nothing came. He opened his contacts one last time. scrolling slowly. Names blurred together. People who were struggling just like him, people asleep, people who had already said no. He locked the phone and slipped it into his pocket. This was on him now. He tightened his boots, pulling the laces hard enough to hurt. Adjusted the straps of his backpack. Took a deep breath that burned his chest. Then, at 1:00, he stepped off the curb and started walking. The city felt different at that hour. Quieter, harsher. Streetlights flickered like they were deciding whether to stay awake or give up. His footsteps echoed against closed storefronts and empty bus stops. At first, he walked fast, almost hopeful. Just keep moving, he told himself. You'll figure it out. After the first mile, his calves tightened. After the second, his shoulders burned. By the third, the cold had found its way through his jacket. Cars passed occasionally, headlights sweeping over him for a brief second before disappearing. Every time his heart jumped, then sank. He wasn't asking for much. Just a ride. Just a chance. Instead, he walked. He passed neighborhoods that looked nothing like his own. Tall fences, dark windows, security signs warning people like him to stay out. A stray dog followed him for a block before losing interest. Time slowed. With every step, doubts crept in. What if I'm late anyway? What if I collapse before I get there? What if all this suffering is for nothing? But quitting wasn't an option. If he stopped, the job disappeared. If the job disappeared, so did his family's last lifeline. So he walked through the pain, through the hunger, through the fear. Around 2:30 a.m., his phone buzzed. For a split second, hope exploded in his chest. Then he saw it was just a low battery warning. He laughed quietly to himself, a tired, broken laugh, and kept moving. That's when he noticed the silence behind him break. A distant engine. Slow. Steady. Headlights appeared in his peripheral vision, rolling up behind him. The car didn't pass. It slowed. His stomach tightened. He didn't turn around immediately. He knew better. Late night. Empty street. You didn't give people a reason to misunderstand you. Red and blue lights flashed. His heart dropped. A police cruiser stopped behind him, lights washing the street in color. He froze, hands visible, breathing controlled. The driver's side door opened. Hey, a voice called out. You, stop right there. He turned slowly, confusion and fear written across his face. He hadn't run. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was just a mechanic, walking 15 kilometers to save his future. And he had no idea that this moment, right here, under a flickering streetlight, was about to shock everyone who witnessed what came next. The road was empty, not the peaceful kind of empty, the kind that presses against your chest and makes your own breathing sound too loud. The city had gone to sleep, and it felt like it had forgotten him entirely. Streetlights stood far apart, islands of pale yellow light surrounded by long stretches of darkness. The night was cold. It crept in slowly at first, slipping through the seams of his jacket, brushing against his neck, settling into his bones. He shoved his hands into his pockets and kept moving, breath fogging the air with every step. By the time he reached kilometer 5, the burn started. At first, it was just a warning, a tightness in his calves, a dull ache behind his knees. He ignored it. Pain was familiar. Pain was something he knew how to work through. He'd grown up fixing engines with scraped knuckles and aching backs. This was no different, he told himself. Just keep walking. But pain doesn't stay polite forever. By kilometer 7, his shoulders sagged under the weight of his backpack. Every step sent a small shock up his spine. His boots, once sturdy, now felt like blocks of concrete strapped to his feet. He slowed down. Not much, just enough to breathe, but even that scared him. If you slow down too much, a voice in his head whispered, you won't make it. He shook his head as if he could shake the thought loose and focused on the rhythm of his steps. Left, right, left, right. One step after another. That was all this was. Just walking. Except it wasn't. Every step carried more than his body. It carried his family's future. He saw his mother's face in his mind, tired but trying to smile, pretending not to worry as she sorted bills on the kitchen table. He remembered the way she'd looked at him when he told her about the job, pride flickering through exhaustion. Don't let her down, he told himself. By kilometer 10, his steps turned uneven. One foot started dragging slightly, his muscles no longer responding the way they should. His breath came in shorter bursts now, sharp and shallow. The cold no longer just brushed him, it bit. He stopped under a streetlight. Just for a second. He bent over, hands on his knees, heart pounding in his ears. Sweat clung to his back despite the cold air. His legs trembled like they might fold if he straightened up too fast. Every part of his body begged him to stop. Sit down, it pleaded. Rest for 5 minutes. You've done enough. He looked at the curb beside him. It would be so easy. Just sit. Just close his eyes. Just for a moment. That's when the fear hit. Not fear of the dark. Not fear of the cold. Fear of waking up to sunlight and realizing he never made it. Fear of showing up late or not at all and seeing the disappointment on his supervisor's face. Fear of walking back home empty-handed, having to explain why the one chance they'd all been praying for slipped through his fingers. Quitting didn't just mean stopping. It meant choosing failure. He straightened slowly, wincing as pain shot through his legs. He rolled his shoulders, took a deep breath, and stepped back onto the road. He kept walking. Not fast, not strong, but forward. The streets changed as he moved deeper into the city. Industrial areas gave way to long stretches of warehouses and loading docks. The silence was broken only by the distant hum of highways and the occasional echo of a truck passing somewhere far away. He passed a bus stop and checked the schedule posted on the glass. The next bus wasn't until morning. Figures. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. He didn't even look this time. He already knew what it would say. The battery was dying, just like his legs. He thought about turning back. Just once. Maybe I can explain, he reasoned. Maybe they'll understand. But deep down, he knew better. Rules were rules. And in a world that didn't make exceptions for storms or broken cars or exhausted sons, explanations didn't pay the bills. So he walked. Around 3:45 his body started doing something strange. The sharp pain dulled into a heavy numbness. Each step felt disconnected, like he was watching himself from a distance. His mind drifted, clinging to memories to stay awake. He remembered being a kid, sitting on the floor of his father's old garage, handing over tools that were too big for his hands. He remembered the smell of oil and the sound of engines coming back to life. Fixing things was what he did. Fixing this broken night, was no different. A sudden gust of wind cut through him, snapping him back into the present. He pulled his jacket tighter and glanced behind him. The road was still empty. No cars, no people, no help. Just him and the distance left to cover. He didn't know exactly when it happened, only that at some point his thoughts quieted. The doubts faded. The fear softened. All that remained was motion. Step, breath, step. He wasn't walking away from failure anymore. He was walking toward a future, one painful step at a time. And then, far ahead, something changed. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance. They didn't rush past like the others had. They slowed, rolled closer. The hum of the engine grew louder, closer than comfort allowed. His stomach tightened. He moved closer to the edge of the road, making himself visible, making himself non-threatening. His shoulders tensed as the vehicle pulled up beside him. Red and blue lights flicked on, painting the empty street in flashes of color. The cruiser stopped. For a long second, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. "Hey," a voice called out sharp in the quiet night. "What are you doing out here?" He turned slowly, heart pounding, every muscle suddenly awake despite the exhaustion. This wasn't relief. This wasn't help. This was something else entirely. And he had no idea that the steps he'd taken, every painful kilometer, had led him straight into a moment that would shock everyone and change far more than just his own life. The sky was just beginning to change. Not full morning, just that fragile moment before dawn, when the darkness loosens its grip and the world holds its breath. The black sky faded into deep blue, and the streetlights looked dimmer, like they knew their time was almost up. That's when the flashing lights appeared. Blue, then red. They reflected off the wet asphalt beside him, stretching his shadow long and thin across the road. The sound followed, tires slowing, gravel crunching softly, an engine idling too close for comfort. The mechanic's heart dropped. A police cruiser rolled beside him and matched his pace for a moment before stopping completely. He froze. After hours of walking, his body had learned pain, but fear was something else entirely. His legs trembled, partly from exhaustion, partly from instinct. He stepped away from the road and stood still, hands visible, eyes forward. The driver's door opened. The officer who stepped out was alert, posture stiff, one hand resting near his belt. His eyes scanned the empty highway, then locked onto the young man standing alone under the fading streetlight. "Morning," the officer said, voice cautious. "Mind telling me why you're walking on the highway this early?" It wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't friendly either. The mechanic swallowed. His throat felt dry, raw from cold air and hours without water. He nodded slowly. "My car broke down," he said, voice hoarse. I'm walking to work." The officer raised an eyebrow slightly. "To work?" he repeated. "Yes, sir." The officer glanced down the long stretch of road behind him, then ahead, empty in both directions. "You know, this isn't exactly a safe place to be walking," he said, "especially before sunrise." "I know," the mechanic replied quickly. "I didn't have a choice." That seemed to catch the officer's attention. He stepped closer, boots crunching softly against the gravel. "All right," he said. "Start from the beginning." So the mechanic did. He told him about the storm, how it ripped through his neighborhood and left his family scrambling to rebuild what little they had. He spoke about the savings disappearing, the bills stacking up, the pressure of being the oldest and feeling responsible even when no one asked him to be. He told him about the job, the logistics company, the strict rules, the chance he couldn't afford to lose. Then he talked about the car, how it died completely, how the garage confirmed there was nothing they could do, how he checked his phone and realized he didn't even have enough money for a tow. "I called everyone I know," he said quietly. Nobody could come. The officer listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. "I checked the map," the mechanic continued. "It said 15 kilometers. 5 hours walking. I figured if I left early enough, maybe I'd still make it." The officer glanced at his watch. It was just after 6. "And how long have you been walking?" the officer asked. The mechanic hesitated, doing the math in his head. "Since 1, he said. A.M. The officer looked at him more closely now. Not like a suspect, like a human being. He noticed the way the young man shifted his weight, tried to keep pressure off one leg. The way his hands shook when he pulled them from his pockets. The dark circles under his eyes. The dirt on his boots worn smooth from miles of pavement. "You've already walked most of it, haven't you?" the officer asked. "Yes, sir." "How much farther?" "About 5 kilometers." The officer exhaled slowly through his nose. He took a step back and folded his arms, studying the road again. The emptiness, the quiet, the absurdity of someone pushing themselves this far just to earn a paycheck. "You could have turned back," he said. "Most people would have." The mechanic nodded. "I thought about it. So why didn't you?" The answer came without hesitation. "Because if I quit now," he said, "I'm not just late to work. I'm late to my life." The words hung in the cool morning air. The officer's jaw tightened slightly. He looked down at the young man's legs again, visibly shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Looked at his face, pale, exhausted, but steady. There was no panic in his eyes, no excuse-making, no anger, just determination stretched thin. This wasn't someone running from responsibility. This was someone running toward it, mile after painful mile. The officer cleared his throat. "You got any ID on you?" "Yes, sir." The mechanic reached slowly into his pocket, making sure his movements were clear, and handed it over. The officer glanced at it, then typed something into the radio microphone clipped to his shoulder. The static crackled softly as he waited for a response. For a moment, the mechanic wondered if this was where it all went wrong. Walking on a highway. Possible citation. Maybe worse. The thought made his chest tighten. The officer nodded to himself as the radio responded. He handed the ID back. "Everything checks out," he said. The mechanic let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The officer looked at him again, really looked, and something shifted. "Son," he said, tone softer now, "you shouldn't be doing this alone." "I know," the mechanic replied. but I don't have another option. The officer was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "You eaten anything?" The mechanic shook his head. "Not since yesterday afternoon." The officer glanced at the passenger seat of his cruiser, then back at the road ahead. The morning light was growing stronger now, revealing how far the young man still had to go. He sighed. "Sit down for a second," the officer said, gesturing toward the guardrail. The mechanic hesitated. Sitting felt dangerous, like his legs might refuse to stand again. But he obeyed, lowering himself carefully until he was perched on the edge. The officer walked back to the cruiser and opened the passenger door. He rummaged around for a moment, then returned with a bottle of water and a wrapped granola bar. "Take these," he said, handing them over. The mechanic stared at the items, stunned. "I can't." "Yes, you can," the officer interrupted gently. "Eat." His hand shook as he unwrapped the bar. The first bite felt almost painful, his body reacting to nourishment after so long without it. He drank the water slowly, afraid to waste a single drop. The officer watched him quietly. "You've got grit," he said finally. "Not a lot of people your age would do what you're doing." The mechanic swallowed. "I don't feel strong," he admitted. "I just don't want to fail." The officer nodded. "Most people who don't want to fail end up succeeding." He looked down the road again. Then he said something that made the mechanic's heart stop. "All right," the officer said. "Here's the thing." He paused. "Technically, I could write you up for walking on the highway. Could tell you to turn around and find another way." The mechanic's stomach sank. "But," the officer continued, "I don't think a piece of paper is what this situation needs." He opened the passenger door of the cruiser. "Get in," he said. The mechanic blinked. "Sir, I'm not arresting you," the officer clarified. "I'm giving you a ride." The words didn't register at first. "Oh, a ride?" the mechanic repeated. The officer nodded. "To your job, or as close as I can legally take you." Emotions surged up so fast it caught him off guard. His eyes burned. He stood on unsteady legs, gripping the door frame as he climbed into the seat. "Thank you," he whispered. I don't know how to—" "You don't have to," the officer said, closing the door. "Just show up." As the cruiser pulled back onto the road, the mechanic looked out the window at the stretch of pavement he'd conquered step by step. He thought the shock of the night was over. He was wrong, because this simple act, flashing lights at dawn, a decision made by one officer, was only the beginning of what would soon shock everyone who heard his story. The police cruiser rolled to a stop just outside the logistics center as the sun finally broke the horizon. The mechanic checked the time on the dashboard. He was early. For the first time in hours, his chest loosened. He stepped out of the car carefully, legs still aching but steady enough now. The officer walked him to the gate, gave him a firm nod, and said the only words that mattered. "Go earn it." Inside, the warehouse was already humming. Forklifts beeping, workers clocking in, supervisors calling out instructions. The mechanic straightened his jacket, wiped his hands on his jeans, and reported in. The manager on duty, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone, looked at him twice. "You look like you ran a marathon," she said. He hesitated, then told her the truth. Not dramatically, not to impress, just the facts. The storm, the broken car, the garage, the long walk, the police lights at dawn. He expected skepticism, maybe even a warning about being prepared next time. Instead, she stood there in silence. Then she shook her head slowly. "I've hired a lot of people," she said. "I've never heard anything like that." He worked his shift on shaking legs, powered by adrenaline and relief. Word spread quickly through the warehouse. Coworkers glanced at him with quiet respect. Some asked questions. Others just nodded as they passed. At lunch, the manager asked him again to repeat the story, this time with permission to share it. She posted it online later that day. No hashtags, no tagging brands, no expectations. Just a short post about a young mechanic who walked 15 kilometers through the night because he refused to quit on his first day. By nightfall, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The story spread faster than anyone expected. Comments flooded in from strangers across the country. People who saw themselves in his exhaustion, his determination, his choice not to turn back. Then came the messages. "How can we help? What can we donate? This kid deserves a break." Donations began pouring in. Enough to fix his car, then enough to replace it, then more than he'd ever seen in his account before. People he'd never met believed in him simply because he showed up. Days later, something even more unexpected happened. A black SUV pulled into the lot during the morning shift. Executives didn't usually show up unannounced. The warehouse fell quiet as a man in a tailored suit stepped out. The company's CEO. He asked for the mechanic by name. The manager led him forward, confused and nervous. The CEO shook his hand firmly. "I read your story," he said. "Not because it went viral, but because it reminded me of what work is supposed to mean." He reached into his pocket, then pointed toward the lot. Parked near the entrance was a nearly new SUV, keys dangling from a ribbon. "No contracts," the CEO said. "No cameras. No press releases." He placed the keys into the mechanic's shaking hand. "Just respect for character." The mechanic couldn't speak. He didn't cry then, not in front of everyone, but his eyes burned as he nodded. That night, as he drove home for the first time in weeks without fear of breaking down, he understood something simple and powerful. Character doesn't always get rewarded immediately, but when it does, it changes everything. This story isn't about walking 15 kilometers. It's about showing up when quitting is easier. It's proof that effort still matters, that integrity is still noticed, and that sometimes life meets you halfway when you refuse to stop moving. So ask yourself, when the road gets hard, will you turn back, or will you keep walking? Backend Index Pointing Right, subscribe for more stories that remind us what strength really looks like.